Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today on digital publishing trends in Africa. My name is Arti Shah from the Cobalt Partners, Quintype's partner in Africa. And Cobalt is a management and technology consulting firm. And my own association with news started when I joined Reuters as a technology graduate in the 90s. And in 1994, I spent 2 years in what we called news systems, which allowed me to get close to the world of multimedia reporting, fact-checking, and distribution, all of which was digital. But the technology at that time included floppy disks and mainframes, much of which has been superseded, but we were already using phrases like information overload. When I moved to Nairobi in 1999, Reuters journalists were using satellite phones and file transfer protocol, FTP. Fast forward to 2021, and I'm delighted to say that we are joined by Ali Hussein Kasim, a commentator and contributor on technology and the policy and regulatory landscape across Africa and the rest of the world. Ali is an entrepreneur who also sits on several private and public sector boards and committees, and he's passionate about mentoring and investing in technology entrepreneurs across Africa. Thank you for joining us today. We'll start with an overview of global trends in digital publishing, followed by a fireside chat with Ali on what is happening in and on Africa. After this, we'll take you through some of the key technology stack considerations, followed by questions and answers. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to put any questions you may have in the Q&A tab. So, global trends in digital publishing. I think we're going to go through some phrases and some trends that I'm sure a lot of you on the call today will have heard of, but we'll unpack some of them. So things around the user experience, user stickiness, and the so-called death of cookies. We'll talk about the rise in digital subscriptions and the drop in ad revenues. And then we'll talk finally about other audience and content consumption trends. So let's move on to core web vitals and user experience. So if you look at this slide here, what it's showing you is that, well, let me take a step back actually. First of all, it goes without saying that the newsroom and its output are the first priority for any publisher. That said, attention is now falling on the audience and their experience with that publisher, with yourself. So what does that mean? That means that there's now more and more focus on loading times, on interactivity and visual stability of web pages. So if you look at some of the metrics that we're talking about here, we're talking a large contentful paint, which is the time it takes for the main content of your page to download and to be ready to be interacted with. First input delay is the measure of just how quickly users can interact with that content. And the CLS, the cumulative layout shift, is the amount that the page layout shifts during the loading phase. And these three vitals are collectively known as the core web vitals. And from May, we're expecting Google to include these in its search ranking, which means that on top of the existing search signals, such as mobile friendliness, safe browsing, HTTPS security, etc., Google will now start looking at just how your performance is, how the performance is of your website, and that in turn will impact your SEO ranking. Next slide. And if we look at some of these metrics in a bit more detail, this is just an indicator of what is seen to be good, needing improvement, and poor. So the time it takes for each of those metrics to be viewable on the website. And I think what's really important here is that these statistics are actually very easy for you as a publisher to check on your own website. But we as Cobalt and Quintype can help you by running audit reports. Let's move on to the death of third-party cookies. So I think, a phrase that I've heard a lot of in the last year is never waste a crisis. And if we think about the sort of the journey that cookies have taken, it's clear that today third-party tracking cookies are a pillar on which sort of advertisers sit in order to sort of be able to target their audience. But Google has announced plans to stop using third-party tracking cookies on Chrome by 2022. It's not the first one to do it. Firefox and Safari have already stopped supporting third-party cookies, but Google has 2/3 of the web browser market. So it's clearly something that advertisers are going to pay attention to. And what it wants to do is to replace them with a sort of cohort-based profiling system. So you will be put into a group of people with similar generalized interests, and that is meant to be the new sort of advertising paradigm. Well, I say new, it's not entirely new because others are already using it. And Google's in an interesting place because on the one hand, it's saying, yes, users, you will have more privacy. At the same time, it's telling advertisers that don't worry, it'll be at least 95% as effective as individual targeting. But if you think about it from a digital media publishing perspective, what does that mean for you? It does mean that there is a potential spanner in the works for a key source of revenue, which is advertising. And it does mean that, it's an opportunity really to think about alternatives such as subscription, which we'll come on to now. So globally, and we'll come on to Africa later, but certainly globally, there is an uptick in subscriptions and the subscriber first model as opposed to the ad first model. And it is expected that subscription will take over as the primary source of revenue. There has been an increase in 2020 of 16% in subscription revenue. And if you look at a very strong global brand like the New York Times, they are now seeing as much as 50% of their revenue coming from subscriptions. And if you talk to even the likes of the so-called London Times, subscription and monetizing content has been an ongoing journey for them. It's not something that they developed overnight. And I think that's a really sort of key message for publishers on the continent that are looking to monetize their content. Don't expect to do it as a sort of big bang. I think the key message here is that advertising rates are continuing to drop. Publishers, you will need a new revenue strategy. And I think at the same time, you have social media distrust that's increasing. And so that's almost a sort of, again, an opportunity for digital publishers, media brands to sort of, have a new relationship with their readers. One thing to be aware of, nonetheless, is that subscription churn, it's coming down, but it is still a challenge. So subscription on its own is not going to be the silver bullet. Okay. Next slide. So I think in terms of other trends, I just wanted to mention a couple. One, which is almost like there seem to be two schools of thought here around new old channels of content distribution. There are those who believe that it's important to run away from or reduce the organic reach of social media. And we're seeing an uptick in newsletters as a way of driving traffic to a website, so newsletters being distributed via email, or as an add-on subscription service to the website. We're also, but the flip side is we're seeing, social media messaging tools, for example, WhatsApp or Telegram, being used as a distribution channel. And we'll go on to that a bit more when we start talking about sort of trends in Africa. Another recent use of technology that we've seen, there's an organization called Crux, which now has a knowledge score, where a reader gets points for reading or for consuming articles on specific topics. And the whole idea is that, let's say you're interested in health, specifically COVID-19, for example, then every time you read an article on that topic, you get scored. And so there's a sort of gamification approach, which also then helps drive that publisher to say what you might want to read next, because it's looking at your sort of history. So again, we're starting to see some of these trends. I'm sure over time in Africa, we'll see how they play out. So that really was the summary of global trends. I'd like now to move on to and zoom into Africa. And for that, I'm going to invite Ali Hussein Kassim. Welcome, Ali. How are you?
Thank you, Arti. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Great. Glad to be here today. Thanks for the intro. I don't think I need to add any further introduction on myself. But Arti, how would you like us to move forward on this? Should I just quickly do a quick overview on what I think is happening, and then we can go into a bit of Q&A?
Absolutely, yes. I'd really like for you to talk about how far publishers in Africa and about Africa have come, and then yes, we'll continue the conversation.
Cool. So let me just start by giving some of the interesting conversations that have been happening in the last couple of weeks. First, a bit of to get a flavor of what's really going on. If you look at some of the top countries in Africa, South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, Ghana, Morocco, what you find is that out of the top 10 to 20 mobile applications, and we can agree that Africa is a mobile first continent. Out of the top 20 free apps on either Google or Android or iOS, but let's really focus on Android because that's like 95+% of downloads in Africa. There is not a single sort of, let's use this term loosely because I really don't believe about the mainstream conversation anymore. I'm not sure whether the mainstream media is really mainstream anymore. But let's use that term for the sake of argument today. Let's say mainstream media in Africa. Not a single mainstream media property is on the top 20 of mobile downloads in Africa. And that should give me and anybody else in the space a pause. What gives? What is going on? And to some extent, you could sort of extrapolate that to the global space. But we also know some of the top global mainstream media brands have made a tremendous transformation when it comes to digital. New York Times comes to mind. For the first time in its history, digital revenues surpassed their traditional print revenues. That is fundamental for the media space in Africa, and it's quite interesting to see how the evolution is actually happening and how media houses in Africa are starting to rethink, especially after the pandemic, and starting to recalibrate and realign some of their investments to start focusing on a digital transformation conversation. One thing I can tell you is that the mainstream media has something that the digital platforms don't have, and that's content. Content is critical going forward. Unfortunately, the problem is really how you present this content, how you sell this content. If I just want to view some, give me an opportunity to buy a story or to log in for 1 day or for 3 days or for 1 week or for a month, or give me an opportunity to sort of sample what sort of premium content I'm actually going to be accessing. And this is where I feel the biggest challenge is. That change, that metamorphosis from selling newspapers in physical form. And please don't get me wrong, I don't think newspapers in physical form are ever going to go away, but they're going to take a different shape. They're going to take a different nuance. With all due respect, I was speaking to one of the major advertisers in Kenya the other day, and she was telling me, hey, listen, why am I spending 800,000 shillings? That's $8,000 for a full page ad in a Kenyan newspaper, when I know that the next thing that newspaper is going to be used is to wrap meat at a butchery. So that's the conundrum that the media houses are facing. I'm finding this a very interesting challenge, and I think one of the conversations today is how is that evolving, and how can we sort of help to move that forward. Arti, back to you.
Yes, absolutely. And that was going to be my question, what digital transformation, let's say we're looking into a crystal ball and the crystal ball goes out 3 years. What are you predicting for publishing in and about Africa in the next 3 years?
So I think first let's look at the demographics. The African population is probably the youngest from a demographic perspective. Where are these guys, where are they spending their time? The Gen Zs, the Gen Ys, are they spending them on social media platforms? Is it Facebook? Is it Instagram? Is it LinkedIn? Is it, you've got all these social media platforms, and there are some upcoming ones happening in Africa. So the issue really is, how do we leverage? How do the media houses leverage? Because look, they are providing a very solid content conversation. The point that I'm trying to really drive is, how do you extract value? How do you make sure that your audiences are actually going to be reading, are keen to read what you are producing? So let's deal with the audience first. Let's understand what it is they want. Let us stop just churning out stuff and hope that people will come to read. My prediction is really that let's go to the source. And this mobile phone, which we've had mobile phones now for what, 15, 20 years?
Yeah.
And I can tell you one thing, Arti, it astounds me up to today that a lot of organizations still don't know how to present content on on mobile platforms. This is a mobile first continent. Let me just repeat that. This is a mobile first. So my prediction is don't look too far. Just focus on this gadget here. Change how you present your content, number one. Focus, not one of the things that I always have conversations about in the tech space in the region is people still think about responsive. When you're building for the tech platforms, you're thinking about responsive. In my humble opinion, when you're thinking about responsive, you're thinking about desktop and then translate that into mobile and tablet. Already, that's a problem for me. How many people in this continent actually have read news or articles on a desktop? Even for some of us who are working and have desktops and have tablets, we are more often than not consuming our news using the mobile phone. The minute you have a news portal that has not taken that into consideration, you have lost your consumers before you even start. So I wouldn't even go into predictions of 5 years from now, 20 years. Let's solve the issues that are here now. Today, how do we today? Because some of us, with all due respect, are like 5 years behind. You know, and this is a continent that is known to disregard legacy systems, legacy issues. We have jumped mobility and mobile money has Africa is the leader in this. So can we translate that thinking into the media space? And let's focus on the fundamentals first before you, I mean, we can predict RG, but I mean, so what? If we are not even there yet with the trends that have been with us 5 years from now, let's solve those issues. Yeah, that's my thoughts, Arti.
No, absolutely. I think we'll come on to sort of some of the challenges around that, later. But I do agree that sometimes, we're over engineering. So yeah, let's absolutely leverage what's there today. I think one of the things I've noticed over, from my years with Reuters and even today, news is going to be read or listened to or watched if it means something to someone, and often if a decision is made on the back of that news. Of course, there's always the general interest, current affairs, politics, and so on. But I think one thing that is hopefully going to be a paradigm shift for the continent is the whole Africa continental free trade area. And we talk about it in terms of movement of products and services, also of people and capital. What about information? Do you think that a business sitting in Cameroon or Senegal is going to be interested in the news happening in Kenya or Zimbabwe or the Seychelles? And do you think the AFCFTA is going to play a part in that? What are your thoughts?
I think actually that's a huge market waiting to happen across Africa. I mean, I can't even begin to start talking about the potential about that. And the most interesting bit about this is that the established media houses are probably the best position to take advantage. This is all about data and consuming data on making information. So let's just step back a bit and talk about the B2B side of data. Let me just pick maybe one area, risk management, which is becoming a critical issue today. Risk management from your normal risk conversations around risk management is really critical. And when you're talking about risk management, you're talking about across the board, from insurance to regulatory issues to policy issues and all that. This is important, critical data that is not readily available. You have global companies like LexisNexis coming into the market and actually sort of doing some great stuff. Yet Pan-African specific data is going to be super critical going forward. Just how do you just interpret Africa, the Africa Free Trade Zone? What is the opportunity there? You can pick any sector that you want to think about. There's huge opportunity. There are professionals who can give advisory work and can do all sorts of things when it comes to data in the space. So, and the space is virgin territory. You have global companies like Bloomberg, the others that I keep on forgetting the names because there's so much mergers and acquisitions in this space. I think the last one I saw, one was being acquired by the London Stock Exchange for a couple of $1 billion. And yet there's nothing in the Pan-African space in this, so that's an area to look at. And that's an area where not just mid-sized to large companies, even governments will be willing to pay for information in that space.
Maybe there's an opportunity for M&A within the African media publishing space. That could be an interesting one as well. I think
no doubt about that. No doubt about that. But I think one also has to be super careful about M&As in this space because, with all due respect, if you combine two entities that don't have any digital strategy or digital transformation in place, you are potentially, doubling the inefficiencies. So I think compounding the problem. So I think one has to be super strategic in this space. I have had interesting conversations with media houses across the region where they're starting to look at the digital space and looking at potential cross-pollination with tech startups in the in the media ecosystem. So those are interesting conversations to have. I think in this space, probably South Africa is pretty much ahead of much of the other parts of the African continent, to some extent followed by Kenya. We are seeing the Nation Media Group, for example, starting to look at the subscription model. Still very early days. The platform is still super clunky, but you can just imagine the potential. I was speaking to one of my colleagues who is in the space, and we were like, the subscription model in that the Nation Media Group has started is a very interesting conversation to have, because if you're just saying that someone is going to pay for premium content at Kenya shillings 20, I mean, 20 shillings, that's about $0.2, and you extrapolate and say the African continent is 1.2 billion people, and just say that the Nation Media Group starts thinking Pan-African and targets 5% of the Pan-African population to consume their premium content, you can start seeing how the numbers start building up. It's a potential regional Google or Facebook waiting to happen. Now, we haven't even started talking about how the big tech companies are affecting the Pan-African media space. We haven't had any African country making the noise that the European Union is making regarding some of the practices that big tech is doing. We followed the conversation between Facebook, Google, and Australia, and how the impasse was broken. My question humbly to our Pan-African leaders, where are you? Are you telling us that the media houses in Africa are not being affected by big tech? Maybe this is a question for the after secretariat to start having a conversation about, because I can assure you the disproportionate revenues that the platforms are taking or earning from content in Africa is something that must also be addressed.
Absolutely, which sort of takes me on to the point around, so you've touched on, I guess, micro subscriptions or daily subscriptions, from using the Nation Media Group as an example, but who is going to pay for content? We know that digital advertising revenue was already under pressure. It was already less than what you get in print, the 800,000 shillings, $7,500 that you would get in print. And in print, you have a captive audience, right? You're reading the paper and you're supposedly not trying to do 20 other things. Once you're in digital, you've got a plethora of distractions within that environment. And yes, we've seen how these large aggregators and search engines have eaten into that even further. But what about subscriptions and there's a flip side to it, right? You keep subscribers for as long as they pay, but there's also this churn. So there's, it's almost like a sort of vicious circle. If you don't have the content that captivates them, you'll lose that. So where does subscription come? And is the Nation Media Group model going to be taken up by others, do you think?
So, actually, the name of the game is just three things: content, content, and content. It does not matter how good your technology is. And I can assure everyone listening in is that the technology is there. It's available to implement yesterday, not even today. It doesn't matter how, so I have paid my 20 bob. If I'm happy and satisfied with the content, I'll probably increase the use of that platform for it to become my de facto media platform to consume news. But we have a trend, and I guess this is not unique to Africa, but unique to Africa in the sense that we have a trend in Africa to just focus too much on politics. So I'm not saying that Europe and the rest of the world, the Americas, are not focusing on politics. But if you look at the content, you find that you have players who, yes, discuss politics, but in the context of some of the industries that they're involved in. So you've got super political platforms who do nothing else but discuss politics 80% of the time, the Al Jazeera's and the CNN's and the Fox News and stuff like that. But then you've got, even within those media houses, you've got specific programs or content that focus in depth on news. I mean, the New York Times is probably the best example of this. I mean, they do a lot of focus on politics, but they do great reporting on other important matters, from business to the environment to to real estate and stuff like that. So if we focus back to Africa, I find it hard to actually get the level of news and the level of content that fits my profile, for example. So you find myself you find a lot of people gravitating back to some of the global news platforms because really we are really tired of this cycle of content that is 80%, 90%, sometimes 100% focused on politics.
Which leads me on to another question around censorship. And we've had, Africa is not unique to internet shutdowns, but we have had some again recently. So, there are clearly solutions for that, right? There are ways around it. Technology, we can talk about some of those if you like, but what do you think media houses should be doing?
Well, unfortunately, when it comes to internet shutdowns, it's above my pay grade and above the media houses' pay grade too. You just have to roll with the punches. And media shutdowns are usually gravitate around elections and times of strife. So
Sure.
what about the other times? What about the 95% of the time? I think we should really focus on the things that we can control and pray to God on the ones that we can't control.
Yeah, I mean, I think internet shutdowns absolutely per se are not, they are absolutely outside direct control of media publishers. However, there are ways in which you can ensure business continuity, and I think that's really important for digital publishers to think about. It's not just people being able to read your content, it's also your journalists being able to upload their content. So I think, of course, anything that involves business continuity, disaster recovery always comes at a cost. It's not free. But I would urge publishers, regardless of where they're based, to spend a bit of time thinking about that. That's something that we can definitely help organizations with. But yeah, it's and the irony is that 5% of the time is when you need the news the most, or or you need the news. It becomes really sort of critical. So I think we just censorship is not a new thing. It's happened forever. We've just got to transfer it to the digital space and transfer the solutions, I think, to digital space. I think I just wanted to touch on one last challenge before I talk about some opportunities. This whole thing around digital media tax and just more generally cost of data in many parts of Africa. I mean, I know it varies wildly from one country to the next, but in South Africa, the last time they had a significant internet upgrade was during the Men's Football World Cup, and that was in 2010. They're clearly waiting for another major tournament to happen to upgrade their infrastructure one more time. But they're going down the route of data free for certain sectors. But yeah, I mean, cost is always going to be a consideration. What's your view on that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the major issues. So internet penetration in Africa is probably the lowest in any compared to any other region in the world. I think we are sitting now at about close to 40%. But even then, you have a situation where people have to sometimes think, should they buy a packet of maize meal or buy bundles? So, that is definitely a major issue. And I think this is a conversation from a policy perspective. A lot of countries have what we call the Universal Service Fund, where the government, by policy, deducts a certain percentage of top line revenue from telcos and internet service providers to provide subsidized internet, and in some cases free internet. For example, in Kenya, the USF, the Universal Service Fund, is supposed to ensure that the internet infrastructure reaches all corners of the country. So the national optical fiber backbone has been laid out across the country. And I think you can see a number of equivalent conversations happening across the African continent. The point is then, after the core infrastructure has been laid out, the last mile is an interesting conversation that we must start having. And media houses can start playing this role. You are seeing big tech is already, Facebook, Google are already starting to think about internet connectivity in that sense. And if we don't take this issue a lot more seriously and become more engaged at the policy level when it comes to internet infrastructure, then you have a situation where we have a product that nobody can consume, or the bigger part of the population cannot consume because there's no internet connectivity. One last thing I want to say is, if you see the prevalence of WhatsApp, for example, in the farthest corners of the continent, you ask yourself, why are we still complaining to some extent about internet infrastructure? What is it that WhatsApp has done to ensure that even my grandmother and my aunties and my uncles in the villages, we are chatting on WhatsApp on a continuous basis? Is there something we can borrow from what these guys are doing to ensure that we extend this conversation as far as media consumption is concerned across the continent?
So it's interesting you should bring that up, because I think there's certainly at least one company or one media house that's doing that. If you look at the Mail and Guardian and how they are deliberately using WhatsApp to deliver a PDF e-paper, and it goes back again to sort of having this idea of having a sort of a captive audience. So going to the medium that the user is using, as opposed to sort of trying to force them onto a website or some other option. So I think I think, yeah.
Interesting conversation there, actually. I know we had briefly talked about it a few days ago. Let me just pose a question there. So fine. Isn't that similar to just selling a physical newsprint? Because I will buy, so you will probably get what, $1 from me, $50.5. And then what usually happens on WhatsApp, the minute I have finished reading that newspaper, is there some way that the media house is able to control the usage beyond myself? Because I have seen too many forwards to really think that out of one newspaper in one region, probably 10-20 people will buy, and the rest will be multiplier effect of forwards. All you need is forward one into a group of 200 people, and that's it. That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that again is something that over time people are going to have to grapple with. I think just I have a couple of very brief last questions. I know that we did have Tom Kirkwood, my former colleague, on earlier, but these are questions from him. The first is around local online readers. And when he says local, I'm assuming he means in country. So do you feel that there's a trend for readers to gravitate towards more regional or indeed Pan-African content? And I know that, like, in terms of certainly of magazines, we've had the likes of I see publications through New African, African Banker, African Business, and likes of Jeune Afrique. They've been around for 50, 60 years, first in print and now they're online. And yes, at the other end of the spectrum, we've just talked about the conversation. But do you feel that somebody sitting in one part of the continent is really interested in what's happening across the region?
I think actually that question has been asked and answered many times over. You have sort of mentioned about the old media. I mean, as I was growing up, I used to read Drum, for example. I was shocked recently to realize that it's an originally South African publication. The other day, a Nigerian friend of mine was telling me, "Oh, do you know that the Kenyan football National Football League is popular in Nigeria?" I'm like, what? So I think we as Africans need to understand and appreciate that the issue is not whether other Africans are interested in other parts of the African continent. The issue we need to deal with is access.
Okay, so thanks, Ali. I've got more questions, but I am conscious of time. So I think I'm going to hand over now to some solutions. We've talked about a number of the problems, but also a number of the opportunities. If we could move on to the next slide, and Yuva, I'm going to hand over to you. Yuva, you're on the proverbial mute. Okay.
Sure, thank you. It was great listening to you, Ali and Aarti, very insightful. So over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to talk about what is the tech stack that is required for digital publishers in 2021 and going forward. So the key aspect of what I'm going to show here is to look at all the technologies that is required to enable any publisher, news publisher or magazine publisher to help them build a digital roadmap, which will make them more relevant to what they want to do and how they engage with customers. So Anand, if you can go to the next slide. So one of the first things that any digital publisher would have to look at is a headless content management system. With the growing demand for omni-channel customer experiences, which is I'm referring to, say, a desktop as opposed to a mobile or even a smartphone or a smartwatch, companies have been looking for ways to better support a variety of seamlessly connected touchpoints. Now, if marketers fail to deliver the right content at the right time, customers will be left dissatisfied. So in fact, a high-performing marketing team is 34 times more likely to creating personalized omni-channel content experiences. Unfortunately, a traditional content management system isn't built to handle these contemporary demands in mind. A headless content management system completely separates the design of the site from the content of the site. So this means that unlike a traditional content management system, a headless content management system has no presentation layer. Instead, teams can create content within the content management system, and front-end developers retrieve the content through APIs using whichever front-end technologies that work best for them. So therefore, you can author content in one place while developers can build a variety of presentation layers to suit the company's requirement, your digital publication requirement as such. And also you can address the customer's needs and wants. So a headless content management system can be presented on a website, an app, a digital kiosk screen, a smart speaker, a giant screen scorecard, etc. The content management system essentially gives you a front-end flexibility. It also gives you a future-proof tech stack, and most importantly, you can author without developers. Anand, if you can go to the next slide. So one of the things that we at Quintype provide is what we call as a page builder. A page builder gives you a powerful presentation layer for your content. You focus on your content strategy and not be constrained by technology. And page builder is a complete package for growing content, content first publishers. You end up telling better stories. You engage with your audience with our growing list of story formats. And it's also perfect for long, short, or visual stories as such. Now, the next important thing that you would be requiring in terms of a digital engagement or a digital roadmap would be the reader revenue management. Anand? So when we talk about reader revenue management, what we are essentially referring to is how can newspapers build a successful readership revenue? How do you address your content strategy to pricing, acquisition, and churn? New sites across the world are realizing that content is just one of your aspects of the value proposition. Stuff like loading time, packaging, and presentation are important too. Now, as you know, today audiences are used to high standards set by digital platforms. So, and also it is very important that you build products where readers can finish. Readers really love the sense of achievement that comes from finishing a daily edition. In a digital environment dominated by endless feeds, finite products are quite appealing, and that is essentially where a reader revenue management comes into picture. Also, it all helps you cherish your brand. Now, many newspapers still treat digital products as separate brands. Audiences do not distinguish a printed newspaper from its set of digital products or its social media feeds. In an increasingly fragmented world, the value of a brand should be present in everything that you do, which is where a reader revenue management, where you put in a paywall or a login or a subscription management tool to manage the content, where you allow readers to go ahead and access content through a login or pay for premium content, really helps you in creating that particular brand value amongst your customers' eyes. The next important thing would be what we call as the accelerated mobile pages. So what we are referring to an accelerated mobile page. As you know, the mobile first strategy or rather mindset is here to stay today. Mobile internet usage has surpassed desktop usage all over the globe. For example, if you take the United States, there are more than 30 billion mobile moments every day. The moment is when a customer consults their phone and expects an immediate answer. This means in the United States alone, there are 30 billion mobile opportunities to offer something to users what they want. Now, according to data collected by Google, 40% of consumers leave a page that takes longer than 3 seconds to load. That's all the time that you have to keep attention of a user. Now, typically mobile sites take around 7 seconds to load. That's pretty much more than double the time a user would wait before abandoning a page. Now, Google launched the accelerated mobile pages as an open source project to ensure the mobile web pages operate at optimal speed. The AMP allows you to create web pages and ads that are consistently fast, beautiful, and high performing across devices and distribution platforms. More than 1.5 billion AMP pages have been created to date, and more than 100 leading analytics, ad tech, and content management providers support the AMP format. Now, what essentially happens here? You get higher performance and better engagement. Pages created in the AMP load instantly, giving users a smooth, engaging experience on both their mobile phones and the desktop. And most importantly, AMP also provides you with flexibility and results. Businesses have the opportunity to decide how to present their content and what technology vendors to use, while maintaining and improving the KPIs, the key performance indicators. The other thing that would also be required would be the audience engagement platform. Anand? So what we refer to as audience engagement, which is essentially a commenting tool, a widget which allows users or readers or the audience to go ahead and post their comments, their viewpoints on a particular article that's been written. Engaging audience is very important because engaged users are likely to trust your brand, the publisher's brand that is. They return more often to a website, visit more pages during a session, and are inclined to sign up for emails and newsletters. And importantly, they are more likely to convert to paid subscribers, which is you start getting more readership revenue. Simultaneously, revenue per ad is boosted because advertisers are willing to pay more for positions on a highly valued, highly engaged website. So the real engagement metrics would be average number of pages per session, average session duration, bounce rate, returning visitors versus new visitors, shares, a number of shares from your article pages, and also engage time. And these are the five, I would say, the more important components whenever you are thinking about a digital roadmap and strategy. All these are available under Quintype's suite of products, starting with the headless CMS all the way to the audience engagement. All right. Also, it's important that we look at mobile apps. It is very important that you have a mobile app to ensure that you carry on in terms of the mobile first world that we live in today. So it is important that we focus on having mobile apps in parallel with the website or the desktop versions that you typically be having. Increasingly, all publishers across the globe, major publishers, are going towards having a mobile app or at least a progressive web app to ensure that they will have a presence in the digital world and also cater to customers' needs, which is we are in a mobile first world, and therefore go ahead and have a mobile app.
I think that leads on very well from what Ali was saying, especially in this continent where mobile is so prevalent. If I think a number of media houses, they've had their print system and their digital system, and it's almost like, well, we'll do the print first, worry about digital later. And I think really the idea is think about digital first, because whatever you do as digital can then be migrated into your print version. And within digital, think about mobile first. I think that's really a key message, certainly for Africa.
Great. And lastly, Quintype also offers you content distribution and integrations. So for example, if you look at analytics, where you want to track the performance of your articles, the performance of the authors, or you want to have an access to a database of images like Getty Images, or when you want to send out newsletters or embed videos or podcasts, or even create Insta articles. For all of this, you'd be requiring a number of integrations. You essentially create a distribution system, a universe through which you can start distributing content through various social media and also through email. So essentially, there's a requirement for you to have a universe of items, applications at your disposal, which is where a headless CMS really comes into picture. You can pick any specific app, go ahead and connect it through APIs or run it through RSS feeds, and thereby you'd be able to go ahead and use any of these apps in order to engage with customers, and thereby creating a better value and brand for your own product.
Yeah. Great, thank you. So I think in the minute we have left, I'm just going to say three things. First of all, mobile first, do think mobile first, and more than happy to engage with you if you've got any questions around that. Disaster recovery, business continuity, please pay attention to that. It's really important, and again, we can help you with that. And I think the third thing is making money, or clearly journalism costs. We all know that, and in order to pay for it, we have to sort of start thinking less about advertising and more about subscriptions. But don't expect to do everything from overnight. It took the likes of the Times 10 years to get to where it is today. And some of the decisions they made on the journey were interesting in themselves. They decided they were not going to be a breaking news publisher, so they published a few times a day. They didn't feel the pressure to do breaking news, which I think some media houses, especially when they do go online, do sort of feel that there's suddenly got to be this 24-hour news cycle. But most importantly, think about, how are you going to use subscription as a way of retaining your users and constantly adding value to them, so that they're not sort of looking next door or at a competitor or at another publisher. And I think subscription, again, will allow you really truly to go pan-African, because if you're right now focused on a domestic audience, yet you've got 54 other countries, and you've got your diaspora, and you've got business people sitting in the likes of London, New York, Singapore, or wherever they are, and they want to be tracking general news, business news, etc. then I think, let them pay for it, but let them have easy international ways paying for it. So again, we can advise on that. So finally, thank you, Ali, very much for your time and for a fantastic, engaging conversation. Thank you, audience.
You are welcome.
Excellent. Thank you, audience, for staying with us. We will be engaging with everybody after this webinar, but if we've not answered your questions, please also reconnect with us via email and we'll be in touch. Thank you all. Thank you.